My name is Brian Gallagher from Ancestry. I'm here with Professor Carol Chin. Carol, you're a broadcaster, a writer, a historian, a campaigner. Which of these roles, I suppose, best describes you? And
They all come together, but it all comes from my sense of place, my sense of identity, sense of belonging to Birmingham and the West Midlands, and my family background. From my mum was working class from Aston, my dad working class from Sparkbrook, and I'm proud to come from a working class family.
Fantastic. You never forgot your roots, and it's always been a part of your life.
I think it is vital that we maintain a deep bond with our roots, because in the west of Ireland, in the Gaeltacht, they have a saying, there are people that lose their language, lose their soul.
Yeah.
And I feel that is same applies to your history. If you forget your history, you lose your history. Who are we? We are as nothing. We're like boats floating upon a sea of despondency and despair with no anchorage in sight.
So if you don't know where you're coming from, then you don't know where you're going, essentially.
I believe that very powerfully. I don't think you can learn exact lessons from the past, because the context of time and place change, of course, but the past gives us guidelines,
Right, okay.
and we ignore them at our peril. For so long, history's been written by the rich, the powerful, the victors of history, and the poor, who were the majority, the great majority for most of history, have not had the time, the energy to leave behind their stories other than through the spoken word. And you can see that still with some of the Shonaki in the west of Ireland.
Yeah.
You can see it in the storytellers, the griots of West Africa. And I think for me as a historian, my love of history began with my family telling stories. I was very lucky to come from two big, rumbustious, argumentative, boisterous, loud families with a bit of Irish, a lot of English, but others involved with us, and who told stories. And that could get me back to the 1860s and 70s through family stories.
That's fantastic. Do you feel that you're, I guess, different to a lot of people in that regard, because oral history tends to be lost these days?
I think oral history tends to be lost. I think there are class issues there, and I think that people, when they become more literate, start to forget the importance of the spoken word, and it all comes back to the snobbery associated with class, that, you know, the spoken word is not as good as the written word. Well, let's destroy that as a myth. It's not that way. The spoken word is important, and even if the story is embellished or reduced, that tells us something about the person who's telling the story and their perspective.
You're giving a talk here today on Peaky Blinders. I'm a fan of the show, I have to tell you, so I'm very curious as to what's myth, what's reality, how much of it is fiction. I mean, from the strong women to the violence, to them against us, the effect that World War I had, post-traumatic stress. How much of it that we see in that show is reality, and how much of it is not reality, I guess?
The show is a powerful show. It's got charismatic performances, it's beautifully shot, it's moody, it's dark, it's stylish, and there are a lot of elements within it that hit home. The stress from the First World War, yes. The strong women in working class neighbourhoods. The first book I wrote was called They Worked All Their Lives. It was about women who lived in poorer neighbourhoods. It was dedicated to my mum, my nan, and my granny on my mum's side, and my granny and my great-grandmother on my dad's side. And that's there. That's really important. I think when we start to look, though, at the elements to do with the gangs, we've got to ensure that we're alert to mythologising.
Yes.
I have no problems with that, because it's a drama and it will mythologise the past. The real Peaky Blinders were not a gang in 1919, 1920 from Birmingham. They were various gangs in Birmingham in the 1890s. That was the generic term given to the hooligans of Birmingham. They were called Scottlers in Manchester, Peaky Blinders, or Sloggers, the older term in Birmingham, hooligans in London. They disappeared in the early 20th century, but some of those men, very hard men who had been Peaky Blinders, were also Brummagem boys, and these were small groups of pickpockets and violent guys from Birmingham that would go to racecourses for the easy pickings there. They would terrorise bookmakers for protection money, and they would pick the pockets of the winning punters. After the First World War, this group of loose, disparate collection of 5 or 6 men here, 6 or 7 out there, came together under the leadership of a powerful, charismatic and thoughtful leader called Billy Kimber. Now, in the series, Billy Kimber is shown as a Cockney from the East End. He was not. Billy Kimber was a Brummie who come out of Hospital Street in Summer Lane. He was tall, he was broad set, he was told, an old bloke told me once that he was as strong as an ox and he felt like a lion. and he always fought with his fists, whereas Derby Sabini, his great opponent, was very hard, smaller, but always fought with knuckle dusters and often had a razor, an open razor, or a kosh in his pocket to fight with. Billy Kimber was very clever. He moved down to London about 1910 because the pickings from the protection rackets in the racecourses around London were better. There was more money to be had around the southeast, and he teamed up with a mob from the South London, from the Elephant and Castle, called the MacDonalds. So he formed an alliance, and the two of them together ended up in 21-22 in a violent war with the Sabinis, their allies, Alfie Solomon of the Jewish underworld, and others from North London against the South Londoners and the Brummies. That was the racecourse wars. They were the real Peaky Blinders.
And do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing that sometimes parts of history are only remembered through fictional dramas or exaggerated drama series?
Overall, I think it's a good thing. Of course, there are dangers there that we can take the dramatic as historical fact. But if it draws people into wanting to learn more about their history and about the times in which a drama is set, I think it's a good thing. And without historical dramas, I think there'd be a lot less people interested in history. Get with the oldest members or members of your family and get them talking. And they'll go, I ain't got much to tell you. But just say, well, start with broad questions. Don't ask the specific ones. When were you born? Because that will just tell you a date. Or how many in the family? That will just give you a number. Ask them broad questions. What was it like when you were a kid growing up? What was school like? What games did you play? Tell me more about your mum and dad. Broad questions. You can always get the specific answers, the dates, the places, the numbers, a little bit later on. Start with the general and draw them and let them go off on tangents. And make sure you record them, but ask their permission first.
Yeah. Make sure you don't get sued later about it.
That's a big thing to do. I mean, it's very different back in the 70s when I started. You just put a tape recorder on and said, tell me.
Tell me everything.
Yeah.
Carl, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. Where can people find out more about you or about your writings?
Anywhere on the internet, you just put my name in, you'll find stuff about my writings. Brewing Books, my latest book, The Real Peaky Blinders by them. Can I just say how important ancestry has been to me, to my own research? Although I had a lot of family stories, I was lacking a lot of evidence, and I found a lot of material on ancestry, and just recently they've put on a lot of the court records from Birmingham, which were of invaluable use to me in the research of my latest book on the Peaky Blinders.
That's brilliant. It's great to hear that we've had some small part to play in the Peaky Blinders book. It's been a pleasure, Carl. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.